Will the United States Supreme Court be involved with the Birth Right Citizenship executive order, the attempts to deny people born on this soil birthright citizenship? Not if, but when. Will it happen in the next 60 days? What's going on at the lower courts on the way up to the United States Supreme Court? We cover it all on Unprecedented, a show that you can only find on Legal AF, the YouTube channel, with Dina Doll and Michael Popok. And here's a clip from our After Dark edition. All right, let's move on that note. Let's move on. Let's pick it up with birthright citizenship.
Okay.
So I'll frame it, then I'll turn it over to you. Donald Trump, as expected, as is listed in Project 2025, the handbook, decided to do by executive order that which there's no way even Congress would be able to pass. And certainly you couldn't get a constitutional amendment through 2/3 of the states and 2/3 of the Senate and the House. So he's doing it with an executive order, a stroke of a pen. An executive order that's probably as good as the paper it's written on, because it's unconstitutional and should be struck down immediately by the Supreme Court. What it says is that all federal agencies will no longer recognize the U.S. citizenship of children born on U.S. soil if their mother is undocumented or here temporarily, if their father isn't also naturalized and or a citizen. That, just to show you the number, in your state alone, in California, Dina, 25,000 children a year fit that bill for having a mother that's undocumented, a father that's not a citizen, and is now under the 14th Amendment, Section 3, a U.S. citizen. And the federal agencies are going to be cold-hearted under Donald Trump, although it's been blocked. We'll talk about that in a minute. And they would look these children, these babies in the eye of their mothers and say, you can't get Head Start, you can't get food stamps, you can't get Medicare and Medicaid, you can't get children's health care, you can't get any of these programs that help you or support you or get a blue passport because we don't recognize you. Because yes, you were born here, but your parents are still beholden to the country they came from. Citing some stray language in the 14th Amendment that's not applied in that way. It's against 124 years of precedent. It's against the language of the 14th Amendment, and you can't do by executive order. Executive order versus does not change the language of the 14th Amendment. There's only two ways to have birthright citizenship, meaning you're born on the soil, you're a U.S. citizen, unless you're born from a foreign diplomat or somebody's here temporarily for diplomatic purposes. There's only two ways to do it. You either get the United States Supreme Court to read out language that's in the 14th Amendment, and we've seen that happen recently, and 14th Amendment recently, or you get a constitutional amendment passed by 2/3 of the states and the Senate, the House. Not happening. So you got to convince the Supreme Court. It's already been pressure tested. Within 24 hours of him signing the executive order, all of the groups that we said would be activated sprung into action and filed lawsuits in 3 different jurisdictions. The ACLU, the NAACP, and 18 attorneys general all got together and filed 3 different cases in 3 different courts. One in Portland, Oregon. No, one in Seattle. Sorry, one in Seattle, one in Massachusetts, and one in New Hampshire in federal courts. And we already got the first ruling. Why don't you take it from Judge Coffenor in on the West Coast? We'll talk about the other 2 cases, and then I'll tie it together with what could happen at the United States Supreme Court and when.
Okay, yes, I know. So, like you said, he basically said, this boggles my mind. Were there no lawyers involved with this because it's so blatantly against the reading of the 14th Amendment. You know, this to me, this is him. He said he wanted to be a dictator on day one. This is what a dictator does. It doesn't care about the Constitution. It got blocked right now temporarily. Whether or not it becomes a long-term injunction, we'll see. But at the end of the day, this is his way of bringing this up to the Supreme Court. And as we just talked about with the religious doctrine, the Supreme Court, if it takes this case, this is the thing to watch out for. Does it take the case? There's no reason for it to take the case. As you said, the precedent is, 1898, they decided in Wong Kim Ark that he was born here. His parents were Chinese citizens. He left the country and tried to come back in, and they tried to deny his entry, saying you weren't a citizen because your parents were citizens of China at the time. but his parents were residents here. They were living here at the time of his birth. And the Supreme Court held that he was a citizen based on the 14th Amendment. And we've been talking, you probably have been hearing in the news Dred Scott a lot. And part of that is because Dred Scott, as we know, upheld slavery. But it also found that Dred Scott himself was not a citizen of this country. And the 14th Amendment was specifically trying to overturn Dred Scott by saying that all persons born here are citizens, as well as outlawing slavery. So this is why we're like, if they do decide, if the Supreme Court were to decide to overturn their precedent in Wong Kim Ark, it's like as if Dred Scott becomes the law of the land. And that's why that case has been coming out a lot. It's seen as one of the most, it is seen, perhaps the most, I think it's seen as the worst Supreme Court decision ever written. And why the idea that it is even in play is, I think, really represents how bad we think we are with this Trump MAGA legal movement. So it is interesting, though, Popok, because the Supreme Court, although since that 1890 case, never really has looked specifically at birthright citizenship. It has decided many times, recent even, not, or at least in the modern recent court, about the idea of how long somebody so if you were born to a U.S. citizen outside the country, like how long that person had to be a resident of the United States outside the country before they were born. And that's been looked at a few times because there was a difference if you were born to a citizen father versus a citizen mother and the length of time that they had to be residents. But they've never looked at the question of if you were born on this land, whether or not you are a citizen or not. But so that in itself is also, I think, revealing, because it's not like they've never looked at the citizenship issue again, but they never looked at it in terms of where you are born. But if the Supreme Court takes it up, I think what they would do is chip at it in a way like in that Wong Kim Ark case, the parents were residents here. So they might put a certain requirement of time residence while somebody's here. I don't see them overturning this outright. And I'm hopeful that they won't take it up at all. Right now, that executive order, I think, was meant and did cause a lot of fear in undocumented people who have children that were born here who are being on all sides attacked by this administration, and the chaos that you describe of them not being able to get benefits from the government because they can't prove their citizenship or get passports to prove their citizenship. Essentially, these babies are stateless under this executive order. And that trauma and the fear is exactly what Trump wanted to do.
Yeah. So we're going to see what Judge Coffner is going to do. He entered that 14-day stay that we talked about, and he'll have, we're probably 4 days left to go. He'll have a hearing. I'm sure that the attorneys general, including of Washington, Nick Brown, are going to win on the preliminary injunction, which is the next step after a temporary restraining order. I think Coffner, in my own career, I've never lost a preliminary injunction after I've won the temporary restraining order. I'd be shocked if the states did. But then we're also watching, as we mentioned, these amazing organizations who are ready, who had the reason they were able to file in like a day is they've been working on these lawsuits. They had them like ready to go and in the can for like a year or two. They all worried that Biden wasn't going to win or Kamala wasn't going to win, and what would happen in the next Trump administration. Just as we were girding ourselves here on Legal AF and the Midas Touch network for that, and ready for it, they were ready for it. And so what we're seeing now is this is going to be the defenders of democracy and the firewall against Donald Trump's worst instincts. It's going to be the attorneys general in about 18 to 20 states that are dominated by Democrats. It's all the ones on the left coast, right? It's all, Washington, Oregon, California, and then up and down the East Coast, New York, New Hampshire, Maine, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and then down to and DC. And those are going to be the main hotbeds of all the litigation on a very fast track, temporary restraining orders in a day, preliminary injunctions in 2 weeks. We're going to see this over and over again. We got first executive order, first declaration of being unconstitutional, first block, all within 72 hours of Trump taking office. That is the blueprint. They joined forces, if you will. I'm sure it was coordinated strategy with public interest groups like the American Civil Liberties Union that sued the Trump administration 400 times in the first administration. Triple that number now. It's going to be 1,200 times. And won about 80% of the time. The attorneys general won about 80% of the time also. I mean, those are Hall of Fame numbers, right? If you had a batting average 800, you'd be really excited. Joining them are interest groups, in particular in New Hampshire, where a case was filed on Birth Right Citizenship, a group representing the Indonesian community that came to this country in 2023 and are having children and want those children recognized as American citizens while they work out their immigration status. They're here on a temporary asylum basis, for instance, unless Trump's gotten rid of that in the last week. Joined with other groups that have just been formed, like Norm Eison's group, Democracy, I think it's Democracy Forward or something like that, where lawyers have sort of band together with public interest groups to be on the forefront, be on the front lines of these fights. So the other two cases are still doing their own thing. They now have one good decision in their back pocket. And then they were all filed in these places on purpose, because they report they're moderate to liberal venues. We're doing to them what they did to us in Texas, in New Orleans, Louisiana, Alabama. We're doing it to them in Oregon, Washington, California, Massachusetts, and these other places. And so those other cases will go up to favorable appellate courts, the way the one in Washington is going to go up to a favorable appellate court. It's going to go to the ninth in your part of the woods. It's going to go up to the first Circuit Court of Appeals, which is liberal moderate, and then from there to the United States Supreme Court. We're raising it now because it's going to go fast. Whoever's the loser of the next order by Coffiner is going to take it up to the ninth. The others are going to move around on their own path and catch up, and then we're going to have this ruling by the ninth, probably affirming the decision by the trial judge, we hope, and the other two rulings. And they're going to come probably consolidated to the Supreme Court, could be the next 30 to 60 days. They fast tracked this Oklahoma case we talked about at the top of this podcast about separation of church and state. They fast tracked it with briefing to hear it in April, which is really quick for them. This is going to go even quicker because this has to do with a temporary block, 14 days. That's going to have to get rolled into a preliminary injunction, then a hearing on appeal, and then I think where are we now? Effectively February. By April, that last term, that last set of oral arguments that the Supreme Court hears, which is always in April, before it kind of goes off to write the opinions. We start seeing them in May and June and July before they get out of town for the holidays. But it's going to be an April event, right? Could be a March event, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, I hope they don't have oral arguments for this. The best case scenario would be the Ninth Circuit is liberal. They're going to find this unconstitutional. And the best case scenario is that the Supreme Court denies cert, that they do not review it. There's nothing in their precedent that makes this unclear. The Supreme Court is supposed to step in to provide clarity around the law. There's nothing in it to have any ambiguity around the law. So if they take it, it's because they're going to try to change it.
Yeah.
So
1,000%.
That will be something for people to look out for.
I don't think there's the numbers to change birthright citizenship. There's stray language that has been interpreted, as we mentioned over and over again, that it applies to foreign diplomats, not people that come to this country, even illegally or undocumented. That has to do with whether you're subject to the jurisdiction or of a foreign territory or not. That's what MAGA is using to try to argue these people are here illegally, and therefore they're not subject to the United States. They're subject to wherever they came from, Mexico, Uruguay, Indonesia, fill in the blank, and so's the baby, which is sort of ridiculous. But that is going to be their barely straight-faced argument, and the Supreme Court's going to have to weigh in based on the precedent that you mentioned from 1898 and the language of the 14th Amendment. Now, I know that gets people upset because this very Supreme Court just screwed around with the 14th Amendment, Section 1, when they decided that, or sorry, Section 3, when they decided to, it doesn't say what it says about insurrectionists on the ballot and who makes that decision. So, but I still don't think John Roberts is going to find that through executive order, you can reinterpret the Constitution without at least Congress talking and passing a law, because it is a major decision, and they have that major decision doctrine. They don't like executive orders particularly, and they don't like executive orders that deal with major issues that are roiling the country. So if they're consistent, they should strike this down and uphold what Judge Coffiner just did. But we'll have to see. John Roberts is, of course, circling the drain of history as one of the worst Supreme Court justices we've ever had, in my view.
I think you're right. I think that, Congress has legislated around this issue. If Congress were to legislate around it and have some sort of time requirement, I think this is where they're going to try to chip at it, have some sort of time requirement that you have to be here. So even if you're undocumented a certain period of time, and then, they keep going. But I think you're right. Without that action, this probably is not the moment that, let's hope, that they want to do any kind of change. And just really fast, because I know we didn't touch on it. The phrase subject to jurisdiction is the phrase that Trump is saying doesn't apply to children or undocumented citizens. But as we know, if even somebody who's like a tourist here commits a crime in our country, they are subject to jurisdiction. You go through trial, you serve time. So I think that's the thing too here that's tricky is, does the Supreme Court really want to unwind that? Because I don't see how you say under this particular clause, even a tourist is not subject to our jurisdiction. You're going to create a lot of havoc, honestly, in the criminal justice system.
Well, that came up with Judge Coffiner in his debate with Shumate, the lawyer for the Justice Department, when he said, he actually raised that very one. And in response, when he said, that's criminal law, not citizenship, that's when the judge said, this is the most blatantly unconstitutional thing I've ever seen. He then said something I love because it just speaks to history. He said, history will look back on judges and lawyers and ask, where were they when laws like this were attempted to be shoved down our throat? So we're gonna look at that. And then finally, on that particular issue, I mentioned this on other hot takes. Little known fact: undocumented immigrants to this country paid $65 billion in taxes last year. So if they're not subject, maybe they should stop paying their taxes.
Yes, right.
Because they're not subject to the laws of this country. And they're subject to the laws of Mexico. So listen, this is the stuff, but this is going to move rapidly. That's why I wanted to get it up here. Welcome back. That's a show that we do weekly only on Legal AF, the YouTube channel. Take a minute, hit the free subscribe button, and help us continue to grow this channel. We cover it all from inside the United States Supreme Court, the decisions, the oral arguments, the infighting, the leaks, to the outside, the ethical issues swirling around the court. Can only find it on Unprecedented. So join me and Dina Doll here on Legal AF and Unprecedented. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories, the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.